Welcome everyone, welcome one and all back to the Hoplite channel. I am your host, as always, Hop, and you are here because you clicked on the video to see Norse Lit, the Saga of the Volsungs, Part 1. So yeah, we are now moving into the next saga of the Norse Lit series, the Saga of the Volsungs. I appreciate everybody coming back for this last series in the Norse Literature series. We concluded with the saga of King Hrolf Kraki last time, and yeah, that was a fun read. I enjoyed doing that, and I hope you enjoyed the series so far. So it's about to rain outside, so if there's any thunder in the background, that's what that noise is. So I apologize if it starts to get loud out there, but yeah, summer rain is definitely coming, it sounds like. Anyway, we're going to now move into the epic tale of the Volsungs, and in particular the hero Sigurd. And as I said in the saga of Hrolf Kraki, I love that story, but this one's perhaps my favorite, and it's probably the most the most famous of all the Icelandic sagas and skaldic poetry. It definitely has permeated many different genres of literature, entertainment, movies even. So as we read, I'm sure you'll probably see the similarities this story has with many other famous works of art, literature, and even film. So let's get a little backstory though before we begin in the reading itself. And let's talk about where this saga came from. So as I said a moment ago, it is an Icelandic saga, and just like the saga of Hrolf Kraki and the prose Edda, it was written in 1200, 1270, somewhere in that area. So we know that it was written in this time, but we don't know the author, right? So it's similar to Hrolf Kraki in that regard, in that it was written as an Icelandic saga in this period between 1000 AD and 1300 AD, but we don't know if the person who actually wrote this story down was the original author or just transcribing it. But in any event, we have the story, and it is an example of prose Eddic poetry. Although it's unknown whether or not the author of the Saga of the Volsungs knew of Snorri Sturluson's prose Edda, or if those stories were just held in common by Norse writers, Norse poets, and were used interchangeably for whatever they were writing down, be it poetry or prose, or just stories by word of mouth. So we now move to a different part of Europe at this time. So Iceland, obviously, we had in the north, in the Nordic countries, but the Nibelungenlied, right? The Nibelungenlied. This was a Germanic epic poem, and it was written around 1200 AD. And this simply translates to the Song of the Nibelungs. And as I said, it's a Germanic heroic poem, and it deals with the hero Siegfried, the Dragon Slayer. And as we'll find in the Saga of the Volsungs, Sigurd is also the Dragon Slayer. So Siegfried is the German version of Sigurd. So the idea being that this story had its roots in Germanic folklore around 1200, and then was perhaps brought to Iceland by a pioneer who took this story and gave it his own Icelandic, Norse pagan, I guess you would say, twist. It has all of the same characteristics as the Nibelungenlied, and Siegfried is Sigurd, but we see that Sigurd is more of the Norse pagan Viking hero, whereas Siegfried has more in common with an Arthurian hero that follows a code of chivalry, probably more influenced by Christianity that had come to the German, Austrian region at this time. But in any event, it was written in 1200, the Nibelungenlied, and the Volsungs was written sometime shortly thereafter. So it's definitely possible that someone who knew of this story, the Nibelungenlied, brought it to Iceland, created their own version with the Saga of the Volsungs, and that's how we have the two different works. Moving forward even further, potentially 650 years, we find the German composer Richard Wagner. And yeah, if you're a high IQ music fan such as I am, you will not need any introduction for Richard Wagner, right? He is considered one of the greatest classical music composers of all time, up there with Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, etc. Yeah, and his most famous work, arguably, in my opinion, would be The Ring of the Nibelung. And The Ring of the Nibelung is essentially a composition of many classical works that are taken from the Nibelungenlied. However, despite it sharing a name with the Nibelungenlied, Wagner takes more inspiration from the Saga of the Volsung story. He read this translation, I believe it was a 1815 translation of the Saga of the Volsungs, and he decided that he was so enthralled with the stories that he was going to set those stories to musical score. So it's kind of like the story was his movie, and he was, the John Williams, trying to create, the score for Indiana Jones or Star Wars or whatever, or Superman. Wagner's love of this story is what inspired the Ring of the Nibelung. And yeah, so obviously he was German, so the Germans would have more in common and have more knowledge of the Nibelungenlied. However, Wagner's inspiration comes more from the pagan story of the Volsung saga. Right, yeah. If you're familiar with classical music, you know that people hear the bum, 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 and immediately no one has to think twice. That's Beethoven's Fifth, right? And similarly, when you hear bum, 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 that's the Ride of the Valkyrie. That's Wagner's Ride of the Valkyrie from the Ring of the Nibelung. And if you're a fan of American cinema, Apocalypse Now, which is Francis Ford Coppola's Vietnam / Joseph Conrad Heart of Darkness story, that famous scene where the air cavalry is coming in, the Hilo gunships, and you got Robert Duvall's character on the beach sitting down saying, I love the smell of napalm in the morning. Smells like victory. And it's one of those like classic American movie scenes that you can't forget. And it makes sense because the Ride of the Valkyrie, you have these celestial goddesses coming in on these horses, swooping down on the battlefield to scoop guys up and take them to that Hooters restaurant in the sky. And right, you have the Hilo gunships coming in like the Valkyrie, riding in on their winged horses to the battlefield in Apocalypse Now. So it was that movie is a classic, and yeah, that scene I think is a classic within that movie. So of course, Richard Wagner's Ride of the Valkyrie in the Ring of the Nibelung. All right, so that's a little bit of the backstory. For the first part, we're going to read more of the genealogy of the Volsungs, as in who were Sigurd's parents and ancestors, and where did they come from, and how do we get to where we are with Sigurd as the champion? Similar to how we began the saga of Rolf Kraki with the parentage and the ancestry of Rolf Kraki. Okay, so let's get to the genealogy for the opening chapters. But before we do, let's crack some mead, right? Can't forget this. This is an apple flavored variation I did, which is actually called a Siger, believe it or not. I don't know why it's called Siger. It sounds like cider, but it's yeah, when you use mead and apples together in one concoction, you get a Siger. All right, so let's go. Okay. So here we are, Saga of the Volsungs. Yep, another Penguin classic. And we'll open now to page 35. This is a chapter, Odin guides Siggi from the other world. And it begins. Here we begin by telling of a man who was named Siggi, and it was said that he was the son of Odin. Another man called Skadi is introduced in the saga. He was powerful and imposing. Siggi, however, was the more important of the two and was a better stock. according to what was said in those days. Skadi owned a thrall called Bredi, who should be mentioned in the account of these events. Bredi was well informed in the things he had to do. He was equal in skills and accomplishments to those who were thought more worthy, and he was better than some. Now there is this to be told. Siggi once went hunting with the thrall, and they hunted all day until evening. When they compared their kills in the evening, Bredi's was larger and better than Siggi's, which greatly displeased Siggi. He said he wondered that a thrall should outdo him in hunting. For this reason he attacked and killed Bredi, and then disposed of the corpse by burying it in a snowdrift. That evening Siggi went home and said that Bredi had ridden away from him in the forest. He was soon out of my sight, and I did not know what became of him. Skadi doubted Siggi's story. He guessed that there was likely to be deception on Siggi's part, and that Siggi had killed the thrall. He gathered men to look for Bredi, and the search finally ended when they found him in the snowdrift. Skadi said that henceforth the snowdrift would be called Bredi's Drift, and ever since people have done this, calling every large drift by that name. It was thus revealed that Siggi had killed the thrall, having committed murder. He was then declared an outlaw, a wolf in hallowed places, and now he could no longer remain at home with his father. Then Odin guided Siggi out of the land on a journey so long that it was remarkable. They continued until Odin brought him to where some warships lay. Siggi next took to raiding with the troops his father had given him before they parted, and he was victorious in the raids. Matters progressed until, in the end, Siggi was able to seize a kingdom to rule. Next he obtained a noble match for himself and became a great and powerful king. He ruled over Hunland and was a renowned warrior. By his wife, Siggi had a son who was called Reyrir. The boy grew up there with his father and soon became strong, big, and able. Now, Siggi advanced in years, and many were envious of him. Finally, his wife's brothers, that is, they whom he most trusted, intrigued against him. They attacked and overwhelmed the king when he was least wary and had very few men with him. In that encounter, Siggi fell with his men. His son Reyrir was not present at the battle. Reyrir gathered a large force of his friends and chieftains of the land, so that he was able to take over both the estates and the kingship that had belonged to his father Siggi. When Reyrir felt that he had established his footings in the kingdom, he recalled the grievances against his maternal uncles, those who had killed his father. The king gathered a large force and marched against his kinsmen. He felt that he had already done him so much harm that he could place little value on their kinship. And so, with his reasoning, he acted, not stopping until he had killed all his father's slayers, although such action was appalling by all accounts. Then Reyrir took over land, wealth, and power. He became an even more influential man than his father had been. Now Reyrir took much booty for himself, as well as the woman he thought most suitable for him. Although they lived together with intimacy for a long time, they had neither heir nor child. That lack displeased them both, and they fervently implored the gods that they might have a child. It is said that Frigg heard their prayers and told Odin what they asked. Odin was not without resources. He called on one of his wish maidens, the daughter of the giant Hrymir, and placed in her hand an apple, telling her to present it to the king. She took the apple, assumed the shape of a crow, and flew until she reached the place where the king was sitting on a mound. She let the apple fall into the king's lap. He took the apple, suspecting its purpose. Then he came back from the mound to his men. He visited with the queen and ate some of the apple. Okay, so yeah, that's the beginning of the Volsungs saga. Odin has this man named Siggi, and Siggi is the son of Odin. So we could say the Volsung stock begins with the Allfather Odin, which seems fair, seems accurate, right? It's going to be an epic tale. Might as well begin with the Allfather, the father of the gods. And you have two brothers, right? Siggi and Skadi. And supposedly here, Skadi owned a thrall named Bredi. And a thrall is basically just like a live-in servant, or more or less a slave. But not treated as poorly as a slave, just kind of like a squire or like a assistant. And it's said that Siggi was supposed to be of better stock, but Siggi ends up murdering the thrall because he had a better day hunting than Siggi did. So yeah, of course, this is just like the root of all problems is like you have something I don't have. The jealousy begets rage, and the rage begets, murder and sin. And then what happens? Skadi suspects that Siggi did murder Bredi, and goes out and looks for him, finds him in the snowdrift. And what does this remind you of, right? When murder is done, who is cast out of the garden? Or who commits the first mortal sin. It's Cain against Abel. But in a similar way, Siggy embodies Cain and Adam and Eve, because he commits murder and has to be exiled by Odin. But he's given a troop of men and is able to win fame and glory for himself and become a well-renowned king. But then he gets married. His wife's brothers, his brothers-in-law, murder him. Their son raises an army and avenges his father's death, Siggy. And Reyrir and his wife now want to have children, but can't. So they call upon Odin, or Frigg rather, and Frigg calls upon Odin to grant them this wish. And what does he do? He sends a wish maiden with an apple, right, like the Garden of Eden, to Reyrir, and Reyrir eats of the apple. So we have a lot of Christian imagery here, but you could definitely tell it's a Viking story, right? There are people being murdered, there are armies being raised, there are wives being taken, but there's also the Garden of Eden with Odin, Skadi, and Siggy, and there's the apple as well at the end. Okay, so we'll move now to the Birth of Volson. This is on page 37. Now there is this to tell. The queen soon discovered that she was carrying a child, and the pregnancy continued for a long time without her being able to give birth. Then there came a time when Reyrir, as is the custom of kings, had to go on a campaign to pacify his land. On this journey, it happened that Reyrir took sick and soon died. He intended to go to Odin. In those days, that seemed desirable to many. The queen's distress continued as before. She could not give birth to the child, and this affliction continued for 6 years. Then she recognized that she would not live long and asked the child be cut from her. It was done as she requested. The child was a boy, and he was already well grown when born, as was expected. It is said the boy kissed his mother before she died. He was given a name called Volsung. He was king over Hunland after his father. He was soon big, strong, and daring in what were thought to be tests of manhood and prowess. He became the greatest of warriors and was victorious in battles he fought on his expeditions. When Volsung was fully grown, Hrymir sent his daughter Hlod, who was mentioned earlier when she took the apple to Reyrir, Volsung's father. Volsung married Hlod. They were together for a long time, well agreed and intimate. They had 10 sons and 1 daughter. The eldest son was called Sigmund, and the daughter was named Signy. They were twins, and in all things they were the foremost and finest looking of the children of the king Volsung, though all the other sons were imposing. It has long been remembered and highly spoken of that the descendants of Volsung were exceptionally ambitious. They surpassed most men named in old sagas in both knowledge and accomplishments and a desire to win. It is said that King Volsung had an excellent palace built in this fashion. A huge tree stood with its trunk in the hall, and its branches with fair blossoms stretched out through the roof. They call the tree Barnstalk. Okay, so that's the birth of Volsung, right? So we have the saga of the Volsungs. This is where everything kind of branches out from here. So what happens? Reyrir eats of the apple, and I guess that's like, Viking age Viagra. He goes back, and he and the wife finally conceive. And the son they have refuses to be born, it seems. So it's almost like he's growing up in his mother's womb. His father, Reyrir, goes to raid or wage war abroad, takes sick and dies. She gives birth to the son, but unfortunately dies in the childbirth because it has to be done cesarean, which this could be an allusion to the birth of Caesar. We don't know. But anyway, Volsung is born. He's already a big kid, and he grows up to be big, strong, and daring. And that seems to be the common thread, right? No matter what, when you're introduced to a new character, he's the biggest, he's the best, he's the most daring, etc. He's even more daring than the last guy. And what happens? So when he grows up, the giant Hrymir sends his daughter Hlod to marry Volsung. So here we have a mortal man, technically semi-demigod because his line still comes from Odin, and they have 10 kids. And the two most famous or two most notable of the kids are Sigmund and Signy, and they were the twins, similar to Freya and Frigg. So what happens towards the end? Well, he builds an excellent palace, and in this palace is a huge tree with the trunk in the middle and the branches extend out from the roof. I don't know if this is meant to be an allusion to Yggdrasil, the world tree, but it's possible because it seems to kind of make sense in this regard. This is the house that the Volsungs built and the legacy begins in. And the Yggdrasil tree is the tree of the 9 worlds. It is the tree of life. It is the force that binds all living things, no matter what realm they live in, together. So it makes sense that the Volsung saga, where this all begins in this palace, is where this tree would take root, and they call it Barnstock. Okay, we'll move on to the next chapter, and this is Sigmund draws the sword from Barnstock. There was a king called Sigir, who ruled over Gotland. He was a powerful king and had many followers. He paid a visit to King Volsung and asked for Signy's hand in marriage. The king took the proposal well, as did his sons, but Signy for her part was unwilling. Even so, she asked her father to make the decision, as he did in other matters that concerned her. It seemed advisable to the king to betroth her, and she was promised to King Sigir. When the banquet and the marriage were to take place, King Sigir was to feast at King Volsung's. Using the best provisions, the king made ready for the feast. When the banquet was fully prepared, the guests of King Volsung and King Sigir came on the appointed day. Then King Sigir had many worthy men with him. It is said that large fires were kindled in the long hearths running the length of the hall, but in the middle of the hall stood the great tree that earlier was mentioned. It is now told that when people were sitting by the fires in the evening, a man came in the hall. He was not known to the men by sight. He was dressed in this way. He wore a mottled cape that was hooded. He was barefoot, had linen breeches tied around his legs. As he walked up to the barnstock, he held a sword in his hand, while over his head was a low-hanging hood. He was very tall and gray with age, and he had only one eye. He brandished the sword and thrust it into the trunk, so it sank up to the hilt. Words of welcome failed everyone. Then the man began to speak. He who draws this sword out of the trunk shall receive it from me as a gift, and he himself prove that he has never carried a better sword than this one. Then this old man walked out of the hall, and nobody knew who he was or where he was going. They stood up now, and no one disputed whether or not to grasp the sword. Each thought the one who reached it first would be best off. The noblest men went up to it first, and then each of the others. No one who came forward succeeded in moving it, no matter which way it was tried. Now Sigmund, the son of King Volson, came forward. He grasped the sword and drew it from the trunk. It was as if the sword lay loose for him. The weapon seemed so good to everyone that no one recalled ever seeing so fine a sword. Sigir offered to weigh Sigmund out triple the sword's weight in gold, to which Sigmund answered, "You could have taken this sword from where it stood, no less than I did, if it were meant for you to carry. But now it has come first into my hands. You will never obtain it, even should you offer me all the gold you have." King Sigurd became angry at these words and thought the answer scornful. But since he was a very underhanded and deceitful man, he pretended not to care about this matter. That same evening, however, he thought of a means to pay Sigmund back. And this is what later came about. Okay, so we're jumping right back into the Arthurian legend, right? We have 2 kings here, King Volsung and King Sigir. And Sigir wants to marry Volsung's daughter, Signy. Volsung assumes that King Sigir is a worthy husband for his daughter and agrees. Signy is not too wild about it, but her dad, he's the law, and so she obviously permits him to make the decision. And they call a feast. And then while everyone's making merry, who happens to wander in, right? Some guy wearing a hood with one eye, tall, carrying a sword, long robe. Yeah, it's Odin, right? Odin comes back to take part in the lives of the Volsung, and he does it in this manner. He walks up to Barnstock, which is this massive tree in the hall, and he thrusts this sword into the trunk of the tree and says, "Whoever can pull this tree from this trunk shall be gifted by me this sword and prove himself a worthy man by wielding it." Of course, everybody jumps over everybody else, probably kicking over chairs and tables to get to the sword, because I think they assume, like everybody else, this traveler is something supernatural. Nobody can move it, right? Same thing with King Arthur. Nobody can pull the sword from the stone except for King Arthur. Well, who comes up? It's the most favored son of King Volsung. It's Sigmund. Sigmund walks up, yanks the sword out of the tree like it took no effort whatsoever. King Sigir offers him triple the weight in gold, and Sigmund's not buying. He says, yeah, you could have pulled this thing out of the tree just as easily as I did if it was meant for you, but it wasn't. It was meant for me. So yeah, I don't care how much gold you have, you're not getting it. And Sigir takes this as an insult and takes offense and plots his revenge. Let's move to the next chapter. Sigir plots revenge. Now there is this to be said. Sigir went to bed with Signy that evening. The next day the weather was good. King Sigir said that he wanted to return home rather than to wait until the wind rose and the sea became impassable. It is not told that King Volsung or her sons held King Sigir back, especially when King Volsung saw that Sigir wanted nothing other than to leave the feast. Then Signy spoke to her father. I do not wish to go away with Sigir, nor do my thoughts laugh with him. I know through my foresight and special ability found in our family that if the marriage contract is not quickly dissolved, this union will bring us much misery. You should not say such things, daughter, he replied, for it should be shameful for both him and for us for you to break our agreement without cause. And if it is broken, we could neither have this trust nor bind him in a friendly alliance. He would repay us with much ill as he could. The one honorable thing is to hold to our side of the bargain. King Sigir prepared for the homeward voyage. Before he and his followers departed from the feast, he invited King Volsung, his kinsman by marriage, to pay him a visit in Gotland in 3 months' time. King Volsung was invited with all his sons, and all the men he wanted and thought befitting his dignity. By doing this, King Sigurd wished to make up for his shortcomings in not staying more than one night during the wedding celebration, for it was not the custom of men to behave that way. King Volsung promised to make the journey and to come on the appointed day. The in-laws parted and King Sigurd traveled home with his wife. Okay, so not a lot happens there, right? It sounds like everything went okay for the evening, but King Sigurd got up in the morning and said, okay, we're going to head back home to Gotland. But you know what? This isn't proper. I feel bad. So how about in 3 months' time, you come to my pad. We'll continue the celebration here for the marriage and the feast, and we'll do it right there. I just feel like I have to get home before the seas become impassable. You understand? And King Volsung said, okay, yeah, sure, whatever. You're my son-in-law now, so we're family. We'll see you when we see you. Signy, it sounds like she has like the ability of Cassandra. She can predict the future, but nobody really believes her. She has this blessing and this curse. She can foresee events, but can't bring people to believe them when she tells them. She says, I foresee danger in this marriage, father. And Volsung says, hey, listen, we made a bargain here. You and he would marry and there'd be an alliance. That alliance is a good thing. We need to maintain that. If you break this right now, not only will we lose an alliance, but we'll probably gain an enemy. So you be good and have a good time with your new husband. And yeah, they set sail, and that was that. Let's move now to the Fall of Volsung. It's on page 40. Now is the time to tell that King Volsung and his sons journeyed to Gotland at the appointed time, according to the invitation from their in-law, King Sigir. They set off in 3 ships as well manned, and the voyage went well. When they arrived off Gotland in their ships, it was already late evening. The same evening, Signy, the daughter of King Volsung, came and called her father and brothers together for a private talk. She told them of King Sigir's plans, that Sigir had gathered an unbeatable army, and he plans to betray you. Now I ask you, she said, to return once to our own kingdom and gather the largest force you can. Then come back here and avenge yourselves. But do not put yourselves in this trap, for you will not escape this treachery if you do not do as I advise. King Volsung then spoke. All peoples will bear witness that unborn I spoke one word and made the vow that I would flee neither fire nor iron from fear. And so I will have done not until now. Why should I not fulfill that vow in my old age? Maidens will not taunt my sons during games by saying that they feared their deaths, for each man must at one time die. No one escapes dying that once, and it is my counsel that we do not flee. But for our own part, act the bravest. I have fought 100 times, sometimes with a larger army and sometimes with a lesser army. Both ways I have had the victory, and it will not be reported that I fled or asked for peace. Then Signy cried bitterly and asked that she might not be made to return to King Sigir. King Volsung answered, you must certainly go home to your husband and be together with him, however it goes with us. Then Signy went home, and Volsung and his men remained there overnight. In the morning, as soon as dawn came, King Volsung ordered all his men to get up and to go ashore and prepare for battle. They now all went on land fully armed, and they did not have long to wait before King Sigir arrived with his army. The hardest of battles took place between them. The king urged his men forward as fiercely as possible. It is said that King Volsung and his sons went through King Sigurd's ranks 8 times that day, hewing on both sides. And when they intended to do so yet again, King Volsung fell in the middle of his ranks, with all his men except for his 10 sons. Because the force against them was overwhelming, they were forced to give way. His sons were seized and bound and taken away. Signy learned her father had been killed and her brothers taken prisoner and destined for death. She now asked King Siger to speak with her in private. Signy spoke. I want to ask that you have not have my brothers killed so quickly, but rather that you have them put in stocks. For it is with me as in the saying, the eye takes pleasure while it yet beholds. I do not ask anything further for them, for I do not think it would be of any use. Then Siger answered her, You are mad and out of your senses to plead for a worse misfortune for your brothers than that they be hewed down. But I will grant your request because I think it better that they suffer more and are tortured longer before they die. Sigir had Signy's wish carried out. A great trunk was brought and fitted as stocks on the feet of the 10 brothers somewhere in the woods. They sat there all day and all night. But at midnight an old she-wolf came to them out of the woods as they sat in the stocks. She was large and grim-looking. She bit one of the brothers to death and then ate him up. After that she went away. In the morning Signy sent her most trustworthy man to her brothers to learn what had occurred. When they returned, he told her that one of them was dead. She thought it would be grievous if they all shared the same fate, but she could not help them. What happened can be quickly told. For 9 nights in a row, that same she-wolf came at midnight. Each time killed and ate one of the brothers until all but Sigmund were dead. And now, before the 10th night, Signy sent her trusted man to her brother Sigmund. She gave him some honey and instructed him to smear it on Sigmund's face and to put some in his mouth. Her man went to Sigmund, did as she had instructed, and then returned home. As usual, the same she-wolf came at night, meaning to bite Sigmund to death as she had his brothers. But then she caught the scent of honey that had been rubbed on him. She licked his face all over with her tongue and then reached her tongue into his mouth. He did not lose his composure and bit the wolf's tongue. She jerked and pulled back hard, thrusting her feet against the trunk that it split apart. But Sigmund held on so tightly that the wolf's tongue was torn out by the roots, and that was her death. And some men say that the she-wolf was Sigurd's mother, who had assumed this shape through witchcraft and sorcery. Whoa, that's pretty nasty. Okay, so what happens here? They go and they attempt to meet with King Sigir at the appointed time, which would have been 3 months after the feast. And Signy gets wind of the idea that Sigir is going to attack her father and her brothers and their men, and this has all been a trap. She meets with them, and like the curse of Cassandra, she tells them, listen, you're in danger. There's a trap being laid for you. My husband, Sigir, is going to spring his army on you when you come to meet him. You have to go back, raise an army at home, and then bring it back from Hunland here and wage war that way. Don't meet him head on now. King Volsung is quite proud and says, sweetheart, listen, I've been in a lot of fights. Sometimes I had the better army, sometimes I had the lesser army. Each time, no matter what, I came out on top. And I said I would flee neither fire nor iron, which is exactly what King Hrolf Kraki said before he was killed in his saga. So what happens? He tells her to go back home to her husband as if nothing's wrong. He arms his men, tells them to get ready for battle. Sigur's men come down to the shore and a battle ensues. Everybody is killed, including King Volsung. The only people who make it out are the 10 brothers. And what happens? Signy tries to reason with Sigir and say, don't kill them at once, but put them in stocks. This will be more embarrassing for them, and it will give me time to see my brothers one last time. Sigurd says, well, it seems strange that you want them embarrassed and made a laughing stock before we kill them, but whatever, I'll grant this wish. They bring this tree down and they tie the 10 brothers to the tree. And then what happens over the course of 9 nights, right? There's that magical number 9 that we see in Norse mythology all the time. This she-wolf comes out of the woods and eats a brother every night. So imagine being tied to this tree. You've got your 10 brothers. You're the very last guy, Sigmund, and over the course of 9 nights, you watch each of your brothers get devoured by this she-wolf. So Signy hears about this, and this is her plan. She tells the guy to go down there and not free him, right? Because that would be stupid. Instead, smear him with honey. Right? Honey. And yeah, the she-wolf comes to eat Sigmund, but smells the honey, licks his face, and then starts licking his mouth. Sigmund seizes this opportunity and bites down on the she-wolf's tongue. It rears back on its leg, splits the stalk. Sigmund tears the wolf's tongue out of its mouth, and yeah, that was the end of the wolf. Pretty gross. But they suspect that the wolf was actually Sigir's mother, and that she was assuming the figure and shape of a wolf on account of her witchcraft. Although I don't know if they ever introduce her. We'll find out. Let's move on now to the Fall of Volsung. Actually, I take that back. We move to Signy plots revenge. Right, we just read that one. Signy plots revenge, page 42. Now Sigmund is free, and the stocks are broken. He stayed there in the forest. Once again, Signy sent men to find out what had taken place and if Sigmund was alive. And when they came, Sigmund told them they all had occurred between them and the she-wolf. Then they went home and told Signy the events. She went and met with her brother, and they decided that he would make an underground dwelling in the woods. Things went on for a while with Signy hiding him there and bringing him what he needed. King Siger, however, believed that all the Volsungs were dead. King Siger had 2 sons by his wife. It is said that Signy sent the elder, when he was 10 years old, to meet with Sigmund so that the boy could help if Sigmund wanted to try to avenge his father. The boy now went to the woods and late in the evening arrived at Sigmund's underground dwelling. He was received well enough and told that he should make bread for them, and I will look for firewood. Sigmund handed him a sack of flour and went himself to look for wood. But when he returned, the boy had done nothing about making the bread. Now Sigmund asked if the bread was ready, and the boy answered, I did not dare touch the flour sack because there was something alive in the meal. Sigmund now realized that this boy was not stout-hearted, and that he would want the lad with him. When brother and sister next met, Sigmund said that he thought himself no closer to having a companion, even though the boy was there with him. Signy answered, Then take the boy and kill him. He need not live any longer. And so he did. The winter passed, and next winter Signy sent her younger son to meet with Sigmund. This story, however, does not need to be recounted at length, for things happen in much the same way, with Sigmund killing the boy at Signy's bidding. All right, so, yeah. That's pretty cruel for Signy and Sigmund. So, what happens? Sigmund gets free, and he stays in the forest. And Signy is told by Sigmund what happened with the wolf and all the brothers. And then Signy goes home, but tells Sigmund to make a dwelling in the forest, like pretty much become a hermit, or like, a hobbit in the forest there, and that she'll send him whatever he needs. So a lot of time has to pass, though, because she has 2 sons by Sigir, and she sends the eldest son, which would be Sigmund's nephew, by the way, to go and aid his uncle, now that the boy is probably 10 or 11, and be of use to him if he wants to seek revenge. In case the boy wants to aid his uncle in killing his father, if that were something he wants to take part in. But the kid, I guess, is kind of a weakling, and he doesn't make the bread because he thinks there's something in the flour. And so Sigmund tells his sister, hey, my nephew here, your son, he's kind of a weakling. He's kind of a candy ass. I don't know if he's going to be much help. So Signy just says, well, just kill him then. And Sigmund does. Yeah, so Signy tells Sigmund to kill his nephew, her son. Then she sends the youngest son in his stead to be of help to Sigmund, and that kid is just as useless. So Signy and Sigmund do the same thing with the youngest son and have him killed. I don't know what the story would be to Sigir, because like both the boys are now gone, they're dead. But yeah, I guess Signy didn't really like King Sigir or her children at all, and Sigmund didn't care for his nephews either. So there's that. Okay, that's definitely very Viking, very pagan. Yeah, not very chivalrous there. Let's move to next chapter. Signy gives birth to Sven Hilti. Page 43. It is now told that while Signy was sitting in her chamber, a sorceress, exceedingly skilled in the magic arts, came to her. Signy said to her, "I want the two of us to exchange shapes." The sorceress answered, "It shall be as you wish." And she used her craft so that she changed shapes. The sorceress now took Signy's place as Signy wished. She slept with the king that night, and he did not notice that it was not Signy beside him. Now it is to be told of Signy that she went to her brother's underground dwelling and asked him to give her refuge for the night. "For I have lost my way out in the forest. I do not know where I am going." He said that she could stay and that he would not refuse shelter to a woman alone, believing she would not repay his hospitality by betraying him. She entered his shelter and they sat down to eat. He frequently glanced at her and found her a fine and handsome woman. And when they had eaten their fill, he told her that he wanted them to share one bed that night. She did not object, and he had her next to him for the 3 nights in a row. After that she returned home, met with the sorceress, and asked that they exchange shapes again, which the sorceress did. After a time, Signy gave birth to a son. This son was called Sven Hilti, and when he grew up he was both large and strong, handsome of appearance, and very like the Volsung stock. He was not quite 10 years old when Signy sent him to Sigmund in his underground shelter. Before sending her first sons to Sigmund, she had tested them by stitching the cuffs of their kirtles to their hands, passing the needle through both flesh and skin. They withstood the ordeal poorly and cried out in pain. She also did this to Sven Hilti, and he did not flinch. Then she ripped the kirtle from him so that the skin followed the sleeves. She said that it must certainly be painful for him. He replied, "Such pain would seem trifling to Volsung." Then the boy came to Sigmund. Sigmund asked him to knead their flour while he went to look for firewood. He handed the boy a sack and then went off to the wood. When he returned, Sven Hilti had finished the baking. Then Sigmund asked if he had discovered anything in the flour. "I am not without suspicion," he said, that there was something alive in the flour when I first began kneading, but I have kneaded it in, whatever it was." Then Sigmund said that, as he laughed, "I did not think you would make your own meal from this bread tonight, for you have kneaded into it the most poisonous of snakes." Sigmund was so hardy that he could eat poison with no ill effect. Sven Hilti, however, although he could tolerate poison externally, could neither eat nor drink it. Okay, so now we're getting into the daytime soap opera Norse skaldic poetry section. The Signy gives birth to Sven Hilti. Sordid stuff. So Signy, what does she do? She doesn't like her husband Sigir anymore, but I guess she fancies her brother. So she tells this sorceress, "Hey, I got an idea. Make me look like you, and then you will look like me, and then you go to bed with the king." And the sorceress says, "Yeah, okay, sure, sounds cool." She changes Signy into the appearance of the sorceress. I guess Signy here is committing the incest because Sigmund doesn't quite know and finds this woman handsome and fetching and shares a bed with her for 3 nights in a row. And then Signy goes back after that time, tells the sorceress to switch the shapes back, and she goes back to living with King Sigir. And then she gives birth to the product of her incest, which would be, Sven Hilti. So Sven Hilti is the incestuous child of Sigmund and Signy, and he's Volsung, right? Because both of his parents were Volsung. And I guess when you stitch his hands together and then rip out the stitches, he doesn't notice the pain. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know. That could be like either because he's really strong, or maybe he's just kind of like, what you would say, genetically predisposed to pain tolerance because of his incestuous birth. It's kind of like, this kid's really strong and he doesn't feel any pain. He's the kid of my brother and I. It's like, oh, okay, maybe that has something to do with it. But in any event, she sends the kid to go live with Sigmund and be his helpmate. And he makes the bread like the other 2 sons didn't. And it turns out there was a snake in the bread. And Sigmund, I guess, can eat poisonous snakes, but Sven Hilti can't. But it seems like the 2 are now getting along because, well, they're father and son. And there's that. Okay, we'll conclude the last part here. Sigmund and Sven Hilti don the skins. Okay, this is on page 44. It is now to be told that Sigmund thought Sven Hilti too young to seek vengeance with him, and that he first wanted to accustom the boy to hardship. During the summers they traveled widely through the forest, killing men for booty. It seemed to Sigmund that Sven Hilti took much after the Volsung race. Nevertheless, he believed the boy to be the son of King Sigir and have the evil disposition of his father, along with the fierce zeal of the Volsungs. Sigmund felt that Sven Hilti did not put much store in kinship, for the boy often reminded Sigmund of his grievances, strongly urging the man to kill King Sigir. One time, they went again to the forest to get themselves some riches, and they found a house. Inside it were 2 sleeping men with thick gold rings. A spell had been cast upon them. Wolfskins hung over them in the house, and only every 10th day could they shed the skins. They were the sons of kings. Sigmund and Sven Hilti put the skins on and could not get them off. And the weird power was there as before. They howled like wolves, both understanding the sounds. Now they set out in the forest, each going his own way. They agreed that they would risk a fight with as many as 7 men, but not with more, and that the one being attacked by more would howl with the wolf's voice. "Do not break this agreement," said Sigmund, "because you are young and daring, and men will want to hunt you." Now each went his own way, and when they parted, Sigmund found 7 men and howled in his wolf's voice. Sven Hilti heard him, came at once and killed them all. They parted again. Before Sven Hilti had traveled very far in the forest, he met with 11 men and fought them. In the end, he killed them all. Badly wounded, Sven Hilti went under an oak tree to rest. Then Sigmund came and said, "Why didn't you call?" Sven Hilti replied, "I did not want to call for your help. You accepted help to kill 7 men. I am a child in age next to you, but I did not ask for help in killing 11 men." Sigmund leapt up to him so fiercely that Sven Hilti staggered and fell. Sigmund bit him in the windpipe. That day they were not able to come out of the wolfskins. Sigmund laid Sven Hilti over his shoulder, carried him home to the hut, and sat over him. He cursed the wolfskins, bidding the trolls to take them. One day Sigmund saw 2 weasels. One bit the other in the windpipe and then ran in the woods, returning with a leaf and laying it on the wound. The other weasel sprang up and healed. Sigmund went out and saw a raven flying with a leaf. The raven brought the leaf to Sigmund, who drew it over Sven Hilti's wound. At once, Sven Hilti sprang up healed, as if he had never been injured. Then they went to the underground dwelling and stayed there until they were to take off the wolfskins. They took the skins and burned them in the fire, hoping these objects would cause no harm. Under that magic spell, they had performed many feats in King Sigur's kingdom. When Sven Hilti was fully grown, Sigmund thought he had tested him fully. It was not long before Sigmund wanted to seek vengeance for his father Volsung, if it could not be brought about. One day they left the underground dwelling and came late in the evening to King Sigur's estate. They entered the outer room, which was in front of themselves. The queen found out where they were and wanted to meet with them. And when they met, they decided that when it grew dark, they would take revenge for their father. Signy and the king had 2 young children. They played together in the hall with golden toys, rolling the toys along the floor and running after them. One gold ring was flung farther out into the room where Sigmund and Sven Hilti were, and the boy ran after the ring to look for it. Then he saw 2 large, fierce men sitting there wearing long helmets and shining mail. He ran into the hall to his father and told him what he had seen. The king suspected treachery. Signy heard what they had said. She rose up, took both children, went to the outer room to Sigmund and Sven Hilti, and said they should know that the children had betrayed them, and I would advise you to kill them. Sigmund said, "I will not kill your children, even if they have betrayed me." But Sven Hilti did not falter. He drew his sword and killed both children, casting them into the hall in front of the king Siger. The king now stood up and called to his followers to seize the men who had been hiding in the entrance hall all evening. Men ran out, wanting to seize them, but Sigmund and Sven Hilti defended themselves well and valiantly. For a long while, the one who was nearest them thought himself to have it the worst. But at last, Sigmund and Sven Hilti were overpowered and captured. They were bound and fettered, and they sat there all night. Now the king considered what was the slowest death he could prepare for them. When morning came, he had a large cairn built of stones and turf. When the mound was finished, he had a huge stone slab set in the middle of the cairn, so that one edge pointed outward and the other downward. The stone was so large that it reached both sides of the cairn, and no one could go around it. Now he and Sigmund and Sven Hilti taken and put in the mound, one on each side of the other, because he thought it worse for them not to be together, yet be able to hear each other. And when they were covering the mound with turf, Signy came up, holding some straw in her arms, as she threw it to the ground to Sven Hilti, and told the thralls to conceal her act from the king. They agreed, and then the mound was closed. And when night came, Sven Hilti spoke to Sigmund. "I do not think that our food will run short for a while, for the queen has thrown some pork wrapped in straw into the mound." And he felt the pork again and found that Sigmund's sword was stuck in it. He knew it by the hilt, for it was dark in the cairn. He told Sigmund that they both were overjoyed. Now Sven Hilti thrust the sword point up over the rock and pulled hard. The sword bit into the slab. Sigmund grasped the point, and they sawed the rock between them. They did not stop until the song was finished, as is told. They cut with might the massive slabs, Sigmund with his sword, and Sven Hilti. They were now both loose in the cairn, and they sawed through both rock and iron, thus coming out of the mound. They went back to the hall, and all the men were asleep. They carried wood to the hall and set the wood afire. Those inside woke up because of the smoke and the hall blazing around them. The king asked who had set the fire. Here I am with Sven Hilti, my sister's son, says Sigmund, and we now want for you to know that not all the Volsungs are dead. Sigmund asked his sister to come out and receive from him esteem and great honor, for he wished in this way to amend her sorrows. She replied, Now you shall know whether I remember the slaying of King Volson by King Siger. I had our children killed when I thought them too slow in avenging our father, and I came to you in the forest in the shape of a sorceress, and Sven Hilti is our son. Because of this he has so much zeal. He is the child of both a son and a daughter of a King Volsung. In everything I have worked toward the killing of King Sigir. I have worked so hard to bring about vengeance that I am by no means fit to live. Willingly I shall now die with King Sigir, although I married him reluctantly. Then she kissed her brother Sigmund, and Sven Hilti walked into the fire and wished them farewell. She died there with King Sigir and all the retainers. The kinsmen, Sigmund and Sven Hilti, gathered together men and ships, and Sigmund set out for his patrimony. There he expelled from the country the king who had set himself up as ruler after King Volsung. Sigmund now became a rich and excellent king, wise and ambitious. He married a woman named Borghild. They had 2 sons, one named Helgi, the other Hamund. And when Helgi was born, Norns came and set his destiny, saying he would become the most famous of all kings. Sigmund had returned from battle and went with a leek to meet his son. He gave the boy named Helgi, as gifts for the name fastening, he granted Hringsted Solfell and a sword. He bid the child to advance himself well and to take after the race of Volsung. Helgi grew to be magnanimous and well-loved and surpassed most other men in all accomplishments. It is said he went warring when he was 15 years old. Helgi was king over the troops, and Sven Hilti was asked to accompany him. Both commanded the men. All right. So yeah, eventually Sigmund and Sven Hilti get their revenge. And they don these skins when they find these 2 men in this house. And there's a spell cast upon the wolf skins. And this is perhaps an allusion to the mythological creature of the werewolf, right? The lichen. So they find these men, these skins are cursed, but they put them on not knowing they're cursed. And they take the form of these wolves. And they agree that one will howl to the other to come to rescue them if one is overpowered by, I guess, more than 7 men. I don't want 7 was the magic number, but I guess the wolf could only take on 7 men at a time. So Sigmund calls for help when he's fighting the 7 men, but Sven Hilti doesn't call for help after he fights 11. He ends up winning the battle, but is gravely wounded. Sigmund actually wounds him further by biting him on the windpipe for some reason. But then he sees perhaps Odin working in nature, sees these 2 weasels bite one bites the other, and I guess the leaf on the throat has healing properties. And wouldn't you know it, a raven, right, the animal associated with the Allfather, Odin, brings down a leaf to Sigmund. Sigmund puts the leaf on Sven Hilti's throat. He's healed. They go back to living like hobbits in the underground dwelling, and they plan their revenge. They eventually come to the hall of King Sigir, and Signy finds that her 2 youngest sons, she has 2 new sons by Sigir, they see the 2 men in the mail waiting in the hall. They run and tell their father. Signy brings the kids and tells Sigmund and Sven Hilti, kill these 2 kids as well. So she really has no love for her kids whatsoever. But for some reason, Sigmund balks at this and says, no, I'm not going to kill your kids this time. Sven Hilti says, I'll do it, I don't care. And he hacks him down. King Sigir calls the men forward. They get the better of Sigmund and Sven Hilti. Then they bury them alive. But somehow they get free enough to grab Sigmund's sword, the one Odin left in the barnstock tree, and they literally cut through the rock. Then they go back to King Sigur's hall. They burn the place down, and Signy tells everybody everything. She tells Sigmund, hey, I came to your house that night in the form of the sorceress. Sven Hilti is your son and my son together, which must have been like, whoa, okay. Thanks a lot, sis. Glad I know that now, I guess. Probably could have left that, out of the narrative, and I would have just been fine not knowing, but whatever. And then she self-immolates in the fire with King Sigir, which I don't know why. But she decides, we wanted revenge for our dad. We got it. I'm going to jump in the fire here with my husband, and that'll be that. So what happens? Sigmund and Sven Hilti go back to Hunland. Sigmund finds the king who took over for Volsung and says, hey, get out of here. And he takes over the kingdom. And he marries another woman. They have sons, Hormund and Helgi. And I don't know if this is supposed to be the same Helgi or just a common name, but Helgi in the saga of King Hrolf Kraki was Hrolf's uncle. I'm sorry, was Hrolf's son. No, Helgi was Hrolf's father. His sister was his mother. Right. Forget all that daytime soap opera got me confused too because of this incestuous child with Sigmund and Signy. Anyway, so Helgi becomes the most famous, bravest, biggest, baddest of men, just like the Volsung was, just like Sigmund was. So that's where we'll leave it for right now, and we'll pick up in the next part, and we'll find out when Sigurd eventually shows up. Yeah, so that was the opening of part 1 for the Saga of the Volsungs. I hope you enjoyed that and kept up with it. It's a lot like the opening and the genealogy of King Hrolf Kraki. There's betrayal, there's murder, there's war, there's deception, there's incest. I don't know why that's the common thread, but I guess that it wouldn't be a Norse soap opera without the incest, right? That's the cornerstone of the skaldic poem now, is that somebody's going to have to marry somebody's sister, or somebody's father is going to have to lay down with somebody's daughter. It's weird. I don't know. It's just for 1270, this was entertainment. Anyway, so that's the beginning of the Saga of the Volsungs. Stay tuned for part 2, and we'll meet our hero, Sigurd the Dragon Slayer. Again, if you're liking this series so far, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you like the channel. Share it with any family or friends that might find this entertaining or interesting. And yeah, we'll see you back for part 2 for the Saga of the Volsungs. Till then, take care.